So this is a really important presentation. I know Dyanne's worked on this for years. It's important. So Dyanne's going to speak the title of her talk is Crossroads of Hatred and Hope, Christian Antisemitism and Alliance. The floor is yours, and thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you all for being here and not being in your dorm rooms sleeping right now. I can feel your pain, but we will get through the next 90 minutes, I trust, with good stead. So I want to talk about this idea of crossroads because clearly in the word, right, it's a compound word, it's a compound noun, it is made up of two words, and it's a non-separated compound. So what's the first word in crossroads? Cross. So for a Christian, the cross means very specific things or represents very specific things, but for a Jew, the cross also represents very specific things. And I didn't know what it represented for Jews until about 4 years ago. I had grown up, once I became a Christian, I chose Christianity and I was like 25. Once I became a Christian, I heard only all amazing things about why evangelicals should love Jews. I had never heard the crazy stuff that floats around, the replacement theology and the supersessionism and the fulfillment theology and on and on and on, and the end time prophecy fulfillment. And I had not heard those things. But I knew God loved Jews, and Jews were the apple of God's eye, and I knew that Jews brought us the moral law. A book I cannot recommend highly enough is Dr. David Patterson's book on that whole issue of the moral roots of anti-Semitism and like hating Jews because they bring the moral code to the world, and nobody wants to be told you should abide by a moral code. So I didn't know those things. What I knew was, I thought, for me, what everybody thought was that the cross represents faith for a Christian, but for a Jew it represents fear. And you'll find out why today. For a Christian it represents hope, but for a Jew it represents hate. And for a Christian, it represents comfort, but for a Jew, it represents cruelty. So those are very different binaries. What is it about the cross that makes fear, hate, and cruelty part of the intellectual mental paradigm Jews encounter when they see it? Well, let's look at the origins of this fear and of this hatred. So we're going to take a short trip around the globe because we do only have an hour and a half. I know that sounds like 10 hours at this time of day on a Friday, but it will go fast. So the roots of Christian anti-Semitism. I'll begin by saying I cannot possibly, in an hour and a half, cover all of it. So I'm giving you what I call the highlight tour. Right? So we'll look at some seminal events and incidents and figures in the Christian church and in Christian history before we move on to, so I'll start with the bad and then move to the good. We'll start with all the horrible, evil things, but we're going to move to something very positive at the end. Never want to end on a negative note. So let's begin with the fact that Jesus and his followers were Jewish. We know this. Jesus was a Jew. He was a rabbi. The Apostle Paul talks about how he's first and foremost a Jew, like everybody understood. All of the apostles and Jesus, they were Jewish, right? So there's a separation that occurs after years and / decades, different stages of a separation. So what brings about the separation? Well, Christianity wasn't even called Christianity when, right after Jesus was crucified. It was called the Way. And so these Jewish apostles, Paul, Peter, John, etc., James, were following what they called the Way. And eventually, it became called Christianity. But while it was the Way, Gentile, non-Jewish believers were converting to the Way. And so there arose this kind of debate about the new converts and Jewish laws. Like, how strict do we want to be? Do they have to get circumcised? Do they need to follow the dietary restrictions? And so a kind of little bit of separation occurred there. Some Jewish leaders, this is not an either or, it's a both and. There are other factors. This is, like I said, it's a highlight tour. I'm choosing the most seminal factors I think are germane to this discussion. So some of the early Christian leaders said, let's relax the requirements. We want to make this really inclusive. We don't want to tell them that 52 years old, you should get circumcised, so let's let them in. Or that they can't eat shrimp anymore, so let's let them in. So when that happened, you start to see more of a divide coming, because now you have these people who are not aligning themselves with habitual, customary traditional Jewish practices, and they're kind of bringing in some of their Gentile, worldly, whatever you want to call it, practices into this new way. So you see this division between the Jews who are more orthodox in their praxis of this blending their Judaism with this new supposed way, versus the others who are just saying, no, we want to do whatever we want to do. So the theological differences deepen. We see 37 years after Christ is crucified that a physical separation occurs in addition to the ideological separation. So what precipitated that physical separation? Well, the Roman army came in and they slaughtered 1.1 million Jews. And the Gentiles who had converted to the way fled the city because they were able to. The Jews could not. They were visible. And so the Jews felt betrayed by the Gentile, believers fleeing the city, and then there was also a physical separation. The Gentile believers are no longer in the same geographical space, right? They fled. So that leads not just to an ideological, but also to a physical separation. Then we have, by 200 AD, this is 2 centuries after Christ is crucified, they have become very distinct religions with very distinct and different practices. And even within Christianity, I should have put a definition slide up, but I honestly, genuinely did not want to insult anyone's intelligence. But sometimes we think Christianity is one big blanket term that covers everybody, and it doesn't. There are many different sects of Christianity, and they don't all believe the same thing. Like, like I said earlier, standing in a garage doesn't make you a car. Just being born into a Christian culture doesn't make you a Christian. So for Christians, there's a very specific belief system that you adopt, and that's what makes you a Christian. And there's a difference between professed faith and authentic faith. Like, you could say whatever you want, but who are you really? We know who you really are by what you do. So if you're saying you're a Christian, but you're an anti-Semite, well, what is wrong in your theology? What is wrong in the way that you've been taught or the way that you're thinking? Because you cannot be an authentic Christian and be an anti-Semite. It's contrary to the teachings of the Jesus you say you follow, who said salvation comes from the Jews, who said, I lay down my life of my own accord, no one takes it from me. So what are you going to do with that? If you're calling yourself a follower of Jesus, then you have to go by what Jesus said, not by what the 5 million different arguments about Jews in Israel are, right, coming from different people. So that's where it starts, this separation. And the Roman army intervenes and kind of takes over the church, and it becomes the Roman Catholic Church. We know the little c Catholic means universal. The big C Catholic means the Roman Church. And so 313, this is the early 4th century, Constantine, however you want to say it, has the Edict of Toleration, also known as the Edict of Milan. And what does he do? He says, Christianity is the new state religion. Folks, it's never a good idea to conflate politics and religion. Not good. It never ends well. It has not once ended well to conflate politics with religion. So, our founding fathers in America said separation of church and state, but it was actually to protect the church. It was to protect the church from the state. Do that research. So this causes a very permanent separation, as you can see, between the Jews and the Gentile believers. And then the Roman church grows and grows and grows, and it kind of is marching across the world in the papal states and kind of dictating how things should be in terms of how we practice Christianity. And everything, I always tell students, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, there's good and bad in most things, not everything. Terrorism, there's nothing good in terrorism, right? There's no saving grace in terrorism. So here we start to see some traction gained for the groundwork for anti-Semitism. So how does that come about? It comes about through the early church fathers who were either misinformed or bad readers or poor actors. So we have Chrysostom here, and he is living in the mid 4th century to the early 5th century. He was the Archbishop of Constantinople. He wrote a series called Adversus Judaeus, and it was a series of homilies that talked about how evil Jews are. Homilies against the Jews is what it is translated to. So he's criticizing Jews and their religion. He says they're Christ killers, but remember, Jesus said, I lay down my life of my own accord. No one takes it from me, right? There goes a deicide charge. He accuses Jews of practicing immorality and of being spiritually blind. That's arrogant, don't you think? that assumes that you are spiritually awake or spiritually aware. This is an arrogance, not to humble yourself before the teaching and to say, wait, I have to learn, I have more to learn, I have more to learn. So he tells Christians, listen, do not participate in Jewish festivals, because remember, before the separation, that's what happened. The Christians were Jews, and they participated in all of the festivals and the meals and whatnot. And he says, don't associate with Jews, they're enemies of Christianity. The inversion that occurs there is staggering. You literally do not have Christianity without Judaism. You literally don't have it. It's born out of Judaism. What do you mean they're the enemies of Christianity? And so because of his writings and his teachings, he propagates negative stereotypes about Jews, and he creates and causes more hostility towards Jews. Remember, this is the 4th century, mid-4th, early 5th century. This is, in the grand scheme of time, it's relatively close to when Jesus was crucified. It's not like 1,000 years later. Then we have Augustine. This kind of broke my heart. This and Martin Luther broke my heart when I discovered, as I did my research, 4 years ago when I found out, no, it was 6 years ago when I was introduced to the history, the anti-Semitic history of church fathers. Because I teach Augustine, I teach Confessions, and there's a lot, again, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, there's a lot of good in there, but there's also bad. So he is a contemporary of Chrysostom. This is, again, mid-4th century and, still kind of early 5th century, moving toward the mid-5th century. He says Jews rejected and killed Christ. But let's go back to what Jesus said. I lay down my life of my own accord. No one takes it from me. He says, hey, don't kill them or forcibly convert them. So, yeah, you got one thing right, Augustine. But he was kind of one of those people who says, oh, well, I'm going to be not an ally, but I'm going to say don't kill them because, you know what? They're witness people. They show us that the Hebrew scriptures are true, and they preserve the Hebrew scriptures, so we'll keep them around for that. That's a self-serving reason to decide you shouldn't kill Jews. He did say you don't need to engage in outright violence, but he did agree with or condone the marginalization and the subordination of Jews inside of a Christian society. So that's anti-Semitism. Martin Luther comes next. Now we're jumping like 1,000 years. He is the father of Protestantism. And I'm going to give you some more names. We don't have time to go in depth into all of them because, again, highlight tour, but I'll give you some more names that you can do research on later if you want to. So Martin Luther was brilliant. He was like a genius. And there's a fantastic biography written about him by Eric Metaxas. I highly, highly recommend it. It helps you understand the Martin Luther brain because it's very difficult for a Christian to understand how Martin Luther could have said what he said and done what he did when he did so many other things that were positive. So again, baby, bathwater. So he writes this little tract called On the Jews and Their Lies. He did a lot of writing, some of it good and this bad. So I want you to focus on I'm not going to read to you because you all are here, you know how to read yourselves, but I do want to point out the part that I highlighted in blue. He says, listen, number 1, beware of the Jews. And number 2, when you see a real Jew, you may with good conscience cross yourself and boldly say, there goes the devil incarnate. Wow, Martin Luther, that's really sad and depressing and horrifying that you thought that, much less wrote it and disseminated it for other people to read. So you can see how we move from the early separation over practices, and it's more than that, but one tenet of it is over practices and customs, into the physical separation when the Gentiles fled the city, into the church fathers twisting scripture and coming up with these really absurd and bizarre pronouncements on how Christians should treat Jews. You have to understand, Martin Luther is like a revered hero of the faith. He's the one who nailed the theses on the door of the church and said people should be allowed to read the Bible in their own languages, because up until then it was, we'll tell you what it says. Trust us, we'll tell you what it says. He was like, no, let the people read it in their own languages. And so that was good, like people should be able to read. But this was his, this was later in his life. He didn't start out an anti-Semite, he became an anti-Semite. More bad actors, we don't have a whole lot of time, so I just want to do a roll call. You can quickly look at them and see their contributions to historical Christian I don't know if I want to say beginning. It's a continuation of replacement theology, which is the idea that the church is the new Israel. Israel has been replaced, right? All of God's promises to Israel really are meant today for the church. But the Apostle Paul rebuked that quite phenomenally all through Romans. So especially Romans 9 through 11, if you want to know what Christians think or what Christians should think about Jews in Israel, go read Romans 9 through 11. So he not only rebukes it, he refutes it, which is more important. Because I can just say what you did is bad, but to refute it means I have to show why it's bad. So highly recommend that if you want to know how Christians should think. And then we see a trope here, Jerome at the bottom, like identifying Jews with Judas and like immoral use of money. That's the trope, one of many tropes leveled against Jews. So those are some of the historic bad actors in the Christian faith who have done a lot of damage and a lot of harm in what people believe. Christians who do not seek out the Bible for themselves and read it and try to understand it and do research on it and find commentaries, they're very susceptible to just believing what they're told. Well, I trust the pastor, I trust the theologian, I trust the teacher, they should know. I didn't study, I didn't get a PhD in that field, I'll just believe what that person said. But God, if you believe in God, and the Christians do, so I cannot teach this a lecture without referencing God, because I'm talking about what Christians believe, right? It's all predicated on what they think God means and who God is, what they think God is. So you have to realize that you've got to go and read it for yourself. And even if you're not a Christian, if you want to know how Christians should think about their own religion, you need to read it. So this is critically important, is not just accepting blindly in any field. It's not even have to be religion, in any field. Not just accepting blindly what you're told, but actually going to do research and consider the source. You're like, oh, I looked something up. Yes, but where did you, was Instagram your source? Like, really? That's what you think research is? Research is not Instagram. Research is not Wikipedia. You might start there, but you can't end there, right? Anybody can edit Wikipedia and put whatever he or she wants. So know what we're talking about. So here are some major events in the medieval era that further these anti-Semitic tropes and foster more hatred, more anti-Semitism. Jews are massacred in the Crusades. Their property stolen. As a matter of fact, in a little bit, we're going to talk about how one pogrom against Jews was started just to expropriate their property. The Spanish Inquisition, they even put dead Jews on trial so that they could take the property from their heirs. I want you to think about that, putting a dead person on trial. What possible reason do you have to put a dead person on trial? You have an ulterior materialistic motive. The blood libel, of course, this started, I want to say 1144, but honestly, don't quote me right now because you all know my sleep issue today. I flew in yesterday. So jet lag and then just trying to get my body acclimated. So that began with William of Norwich, right? This little boy is found dead, and the charge is, oh, the Jews murdered him for a festival, a Jewish festival, and it was a false charge made by an apostate Jew, and people jumped on it. And even though the little boy was found and there were no signs of murder, it became the blood libel. And so it has continued on throughout time. And this is, we're now in 2025. This is 1096, and we see it still manifesting itself in various guises today. The host desecration accusation, like Jews steal a communion wafer. A lot of churches give communion where they give you a little wafer of bread and grape juice or wine, and in symbolism and recognition of Christ saying, this is my body broken for you, this is my blood shed for you. And so Jews are accused of stealing the wafer and the wine, right? And then you have the Black Death. So this is poisoning the wells. This is where, if you teach rhetoric and you understand rhetorical fallacies, you know that one of them is poisoning the well. I always explain it to students like this. If Laser wants to go out with Trish, and who else's name do I know? And David Patterson also wants to go out with Trish, Laser's gonna be like, man, I gotta get him away from her so I can have her. So he goes over and he tells Dr. Patterson, hey, David, man, that girl, I saw her kissing like 5 guys yesterday in the quad. And David's like, oh, forget that girl. I don't want to date her anymore. She's already kissing 5 guys. And then Laser's like, whoa, yes, she's mine. Poisoning the well, right? Telling lies in order to turn somebody against someone or to turn someone against an idea. And so Jews become literally accused of poisoning a literal well, not the ideological rhetorical fallacy. So that like you put something in the water so that the Black Death would spread, and it's your fault why all these people are dying. And then we have the Spanish Inquisition and their expulsions, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail, I think, on the next slide. So the Catholic Church establishes these inquisitions supposedly to root out heresy. First of all, you're not God, so maybe leave that alone. And second of all, there are better ways to do it than torturing people, right? Maybe have a conversation and engage in dialogue and Socratic questioning rather than torturing people to try to get them to confess to something that you think they should confess to. I do want to say that there were some church leaders in this time who tried to push back. And so in 1245, Pope Innocent IV issued a papal bull that said, that's a lie, stop propagating it. And in 1274, Pope Gregory X also said it's a false accusation, and he put it in a papal bull. So the good and the bad, more bad in this era than good, definitely we see that, but the good is coming, the good is coming. So we have the Crusades. These are the Roman military campaigns, the Catholic military campaigns. I'm not impugning the Catholic Church, I'm just stating a fact, right? At that time, this was the history, and we all have histories with, problematic issues in them. There's not a people group on the planet free of error, and so we, again, take the baby with the bathwater. So what was happening? They gained control of the Romans gained control of Jerusalem from the Muslims, and they wanted to take it for themselves, and so they went on, the marches to go and conquer the city of Jerusalem. And on the way, they decided, let's kill some European Jews while we're marching there. So there's this idea, this false idea that the Crusaders were these noble priests and warriors, and they were like a ragtag group of drunkards and criminals and whatnot. Like those were the Crusaders, not every single one of them, but by and large. So those people go on a tear and decide to kill the European Jews on their way to Jerusalem to get it back from the Muslims, or to get it from the Muslims. It began with the European Jews, and they started saying things like, kill the Jew and save your soul. Christians, it gets worse. That's not even the worst of it. Kill the Jew and save your soul. That's what they're telling each other. In 1099, there was a Jewish synagogue in Jerusalem. The Romans reached the city, and the Jews flee to the synagogue to escape the marauding Romans. And the Romans locked them in the synagogue and set it on fire. I believe 969 people were burned to death. Let me just check my notes. Yep, 969 people were burned alive. Here's the worst part. As those Jews were burning alive in their synagogue, those Crusaders were walking around the synagogue or standing outside the synagogue singing the hymn, Christ, we adore thee. Christ, we adore thee as you set God's people on fire, the apple of God's eye, the Bible tells us. So those people have a lot to answer for. I would like to have been a fly on that wall when they met their maker. Persecution in Europe happens. We see in London and France, Germany, and Strasbourg, Germany, other instances of pogroms against the Jews. So let's take a look at the Spanish Inquisition before we talk about the rest of the globe. This is what I was saying earlier. They're expropriating the property of Jews. They are putting dead Jews on trial. Dara Horn has a great book, People Love Dead Jews. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it. And just trying to get the property from their heirs, as I said earlier. The trial was actually torture. People were whipped and racked. They even used needles. They used fire. It wasn't a conversation. It was torture. What do you think is going to happen if you're, being burned alive or being put on the rack and your body's being pulled apart? What do you think you're going to say? So they're obtaining false confessions of people who secretly converted to Judaism or who were secretly Jews and pretending to be Christians. That's what they were looking for. In this era, in the Spanish Inquisition, almost 500,000 people were burned, and almost 18,000 people were burned in effigy. So, Christian history is ugly. It does not have a pretty face. This is the persecution in Europe that I was talking about, and where I promise the good news is coming. I know this is all horrible information, and it's only the tip of an iceberg. This is not even like all of it. I have an amazing colleague, Aaron Free, who can really give you an in-depth look at every single one of these. So what happens in London, England? We have Palm Sunday. They massacre 400 Jews. So Palm Sunday is a big Christian holiday, right? Or important day for Christians. On that day that's supposed to honor Christ, you kill 400 of his people. And then 680 Jews are imprisoned in the Tower. If you've not been to the Tower in London, you should go. It's one of the things you should see before you leave England. 290 were hanged. It's an irregular verb, not hung, hanged. Sorry, English teacher, tick. And then they were given an expulsion to leave. They were banned from England. So everywhere Jews go, right, there's the diaspora. They are expelled from every country. Like, don't you think they deserve their own land? Maybe we should let the indigenous Jews have their indigenous land? Because everywhere they go, they are tortured, massacred, burnt, and expelled. And then we have France. 1306, they kick out 100,000 Jews. The irony is they invite them back 10 years later. Why do you think they invite them back 10 years later? Money. They needed their commercial abilities. So France was like, whoopsie, we made a mistake. Our economy is going down the tubes. We need those Jews back. Apparently, they were really smart and knew what they were doing, right? So they expel 100,000. They take all their possessions, and then 10 years later, they bring them back. Germany, this is the Black Death era. We already talked about the Jews being accused of poisoning the well. What else do I want to say about that? They were blamed for 1/4 of the population. So a lot of people obviously died in the Black Death. They were blamed for 1/4 of the deaths of the population. And then we come to Germany, this particular area in Germany. 2,000 victims, 2,000 Jews burned on a giant scaffold. What is it with Christians and fire? That needs to be somebody's next article. What is it with Christians and setting Jews on fire? They destroyed entire communities, and there were Jews, and this reminds me of Masada, where the Jews kill themselves rather than face the burning and the torture that was coming to them from the Christians. Imagine preferring suicide over death by Christian. That's the history, but it gets better, I promise. There's good news. So then we have Douglas Murray. If you've never seen him, heard him, or read him, I highly encourage you to do so. He's got a fantastic new book out called On Democracies and Death Cults. I was at a summit in DC this week from Sunday to Tuesday night called for the Israel on Campus Coalition, and he was the final speaker, I guess like the reverse keynote speaker. Well, Richie Torres came after him, but he was like the big plenary session. And so he says something in his book that I think is really relevant for people of faith. I think even people of faith tend not to think about this issue that he addresses in this quote. So let's think about that for a second. There's a book, again, highly recommend it. He says, many people in the West today are not comfortable talking in terms like good or evil. In our increasingly secular societies, many people seem to think that such words are part of the past, too reductive an idea for our times. But it seems to me that it is we who are missing something. Evil does exist as a force in the world. I would argue that as you try to understand the problem of anti-Semitism, you cannot understand it if you don't understand what evil is. It's not natural. It's not normal for a people to be hated and hunted over millennia the ways Jews have been. There is something deeply evil about it. And people keep trying to explain anti-Semitism in so many different ways. And it's not that those explanations are wrong, but they're not the full picture. They don't account for all of the atrocities. So Douglas Murray argues that we need to start looking at the presence of evil in the world, recognize that there's evil in the world. I don't know how anybody could look at 10/7 and not recognize that there's evil in the world. I've seen those videos. I've seen like the unedited footage from the terrorists' GoPro cameras. You can't unsee that stuff. You can't unsee it. I caution you before you watch it because you cannot unsee it. But if you want it, go talk to Lev Topor. Okay, that brings us to current day anti-Semitism. That was the highlight tour. There's more, but that's bad enough, right? Do we really need more? Let's look at what's happening today in contemporary anti-Semitism. So we see a lot of replacement theology being taught in the church. That's, again, the idea that Israel has been replaced by Christians, that all of the promises Jesus makes about Israel in the New Testament are actually really being applied to the church of Christians. That's replacement theology, or what we also call supersessionism, with S's, not with C's. There is an organization called Christ at the Checkpoint. They have a conference every year in Israel. It's, I think, largely run by Dr. Gary Burge and Munther Isaac, a Palestinian Christian pastor and lives in Palestine. And Dr. Gary Burge taught at my college for 25 years. He was a professor of the New Testament, and then he left and went to Calvin Seminary. And he's written many books on lies about like this replacement theology. So there are a lot of people who have rebutted him, and it's important for you to understand who he is and why he's wrong. And that will help you understand the arguments happening in the Christian circles, because there are Christians writing back to Gary Burge and saying, nope, you're wrong, that's not true, and here's why. We're all entitled to our opinions, but when you start taking scripture out of context to make it fit, we call it in academia Cinderella criticism. I don't know if you know the real story of Cinderella. Do you know the real story of Cinderella? The unsanitized non-Disney version of Cinderella? They had to cut the women, as the prince walked around trying to get the feet to fit the shoe, the women were so desperate to be the next princess, they were chopping off their toes to make their feet fit the shoe. Cinderella criticism is when you chop up the truth, or you chop up the reality to make it try to fit some pre-existing notion you have about the world, or some pre-existing idea you have for your research, right? You're seeing things that aren't actually there. You're making it appear to be there, even though it doesn't really exist. You're forcing the fit, in other words. So we see that forcing the fit of these theological paradigms and principles. Christ at the Checkpoint has published and made statements that are online. You can watch the videos that cannot be considered anything but anti-Semitic. So that's what's happening in the Middle East every year. And Munther Isaac is a person who wrote a book called Christ in the Rubble. He's like I don't know what big popular, I'm too busy to listen to music anymore. Who's a popular person right now? I was gonna say he's the Mick Jagger of like the Christian world right now, for those of you who are old enough to know who Mick Jagger is. He's the Beyonce. He's the Beyonce. There you go. You all know her. He's the Beyonce of the Christian world right now. He is everybody's darling child. He has written that book, as I said, called Christ in the Rubble, where he talks about the white settler, colonialist, oppressive Jews and Israel. And they love him. He went to a Christian school, and the entire standing room only auditorium gave him a standing ovation. And one colleague said, "He has such a pastor's heart." Heaven forbid that's a pastor's heart. Heaven forbid it's a pastor's heart to support terrorists and to hate Jews. I don't think that's not a pastor after God's own heart. So we see these issues happening on Christian college campuses. That's where I work, a Christian college campus. So my job is to intervene into that space and to bring the truth and the light and the beauty of the Jewish people and of Israel, and Israel's right to exist and right to defend itself to my campus, to those classrooms. So that's what's happening in the contemporary church. Here's a perfect example. There's a conference coming up. Is it August yet? Is today August? Next month. There's a conference coming up next month. This is a church not far from Wheaton College. It's in Glen Ellen, nice neighborhood. They're having a conference called Church at the Crossroads. I want you to go ahead and read the description of the conference. Just the first paragraph. Some in the church use scripture to justify war, occupation, or silence. You see where they're going? Guess who one of the keynote speakers is? Munther Isaac, Mr. Christ in the Rubble. They have 17 speakers lined up for 11, 12, I don't know, just a few days. They have 17 speakers. Well, my first reaction when I saw that was, wow, it takes a lot of people to prop up a lie. That's why you need 17. It takes a lot of people to make a lie stand. So under the Christianese, you can see the anti-Semitism. And I unfortunately won't be able to attend the conference because I will be teaching in Prague. But I am sending emissaries to attend the conference so that they can take notes, so that I can refute that when I get back. And I have good news about that later. So here's more things that are happening on Christian college campuses and in Christian churches. I had a student in a class, this was not my anti-Semitism class, this was not my Holocaust class. Whoops, sorry, how do I get it? Tech? There it goes. This was just a class, I taught a pedagogy class called Teaching Diverse Learners. And it's an 8-week course, and it teaches budding young teachers in the education major how to address all the different ethnicities and diversities in their classroom. But I remind them it's diversity of language. It's not just skin color. It's not just ethnicity. It's not just race. Like, ideological diversity matters too. What are you going to do when you have the Kamala supporter sitting next to the Trump supporter? How are you going to deal with that diversity in your classroom? What about the ideological diversity? What are you going to do when you have the Jewish student sitting next to, well, sitting in the same room as a Muslim student, depending on what the Muslim's attitude toward Israel is? I have met amazing Muslims who love Israel, who are pro-Israel. I met one of them in Israel, student at Reichman University. His name is Mohammed. I told you about him in the pedagogy workshop. So she's in that class, and she prompted me to actually put a unit in the class on anti-Semitism. Because of this comment, I put a unit in the class on anti-Semitism, specific unit. So they have to watch this TED Talk called Danger of a Single Story. Like, the whole education department shows it in that class. Everybody who teaches that class has to show that video. So they watch a video, and this was two of the questions on a survey I did after the video. Like, when have you believed a single story about a person, reducing people down to like essentialism, one aspect or facet of someone, making the synecdoche error. Like, one guy cheated on me, so all men cheat. No, that's a synecdoche error, right? You're confusing the part with the whole. Sometimes the whole with the part. One woman dated me for my money, so all women only want to date me for my money. You're making that error. So what's the danger of a single story? This is what she writes. I was completely blind to the suffering of the Palestinian people. She could have stopped there. She could have stopped there, at the hands of the Israeli government. There's a glaring lack of knowledge in that statement. That's a wealth of ignorance. And ignorance does not mean stupid, folks. Ignorance means lack of knowledge, means you don't know. I am ignorant of how to change oil in my car, and I will remain so for the rest of my life.
But is it anti-Semitic?
What?
I'm not sure it's anti-Semitic.
Not yet. So she says, you're going to see what was anti-Semitic in a minute from the student. So then she said, she doesn't even understand the second question. It's what served to round out that single story into a more complex full story? Well, she said a lot of eyewitness accounts and people speaking up for them online and in the news. Well, we already know about online and in the news. And really, eyewitness accounts, who do you know that was in Gaza? I'd like to know who you know that was in Gaza. You didn't know Gaza existed, 4 months before this class started. So that prompted me. I said, that's a lot of ignorance I want to bring. My job as an educator is to bring knowledge to students. So I inserted a unit on anti-Semitism into my class. Like, what do you do when you have a Jew and Muslim in the same room? How will you help them engage one another? How will you love and treat and educate those students well, right? You can't only love the Muslim. You can't only love the Jew. As a teacher, you have to be fair to everybody. How will you do that well? And I had a student, it was the last time I taught the class was just this spring. I'm not going to teach it anymore. I'm moving back into my other work. But I had several students after that unit on anti-Semitism come to me and thank me. As a matter of fact, if I had time, I would show you what they wrote, because I always make students process and reflect in writing. And they were so grateful to be taught the truth and to understand what's really going on and to understand historically what has gone on and to be able to bring that knowledge to their own classrooms. So if I hadn't received that from that one student, I wouldn't have made that unit for that class, because it's not a course on Holocaust Lit or anti-Semitism, but it does belong in that class because it is a class about diverse learners, right? So, and if I hadn't put it in the class, then those other students wouldn't have had the benefit of learning the truth about Israel. So all things work together for good. I'm reminding you of this in order to show you what the student who wrote that eventually became a part of. So we all know what this is. Where are we? Auschwitz. We are at Auschwitz. And we understand, I won't play the whole thing because it's long. I go down one side and up the other to make a point to students. This is one of the things I play for students so that they can try to begin to understand the scope of what was done. So we understand that shoes represent something very important for Holocaust victims. This is the Danube River. These are bronze memorial sculptures of shoes representing the Jews that were forced to stand on the edge of the bank and be shot and killed, right? So shoes, we know shoes are associated with the Holocaust and Jews as victims, the pogroms, what was done, the murder, the slaughter of Jews. We get it, we get it. A few people would dispute that that shoe, those shoes, that particular idea of a shoe is very much closely associated with and strongly associated with Jews and their suffering. So on the campus, the student helped organize a silent protest for Palestine, and it was leave your shoes on the grass as a public lament. And she wore a hijab to class that day. And so when you appropriate a symbol that represents the suffering of Jews and apply it to a people group to whom it does not apply, you are engaged in Holocaust inversion, and Holocaust inversion is anti-Semitic. I could give you example after example after example of Holocaust inversion, but that's not this lecture. That's a whole different workshop. So when I walked out of my classroom and saw this, I immediately knew before I read the sign. I knew what it was. I know my student body, and I was outraged. And sure enough, I went over to read the sign, and I was like, good, now I have proof of, the anti-Semitism in the Christian community. I took pictures. Of course I took pictures. It's part of my research, right? What is happening on campus, and why is it happening on campus? Why are you wearing a hijab to class? What does that say? Where are the Jews in that? And then so I taught about the origin of the hijab, right? So they don't even understand that that head covering actually came first from Jews, right? So you don't even realize you're sending the message contrary to the message you're trying to send. If you actually knew your history, you would know that. And there's a time to speak and a time to have that dialogue, and then there's a time to walk away because you're casting pearls before swine. And you need to know, you need discernment to understand when is that time. When is it a wise idea to have a conversation? And to have a good conversation, you have to build relationship. You can't speak into a vacuum, nobody will listen to you. And when is it time to walk away and leave that alone for another day or for another person? So those are the bad things. We looked at historical Christian anti-Semitism, and we are looking at contemporary Christian anti-Semitism, but we also have the beauty and the power of Christian alliance to offset that Christian anti-Semitism. And I think we forget that we have allies. Even I, as a Christian, forget I have allies because you're kind of isolated and siloed at work, and you're kind of the only person, with the Israeli flag on her door and hostages picture on her door, and you tend to feel siloed, but you're not alone, and I want you to understand that in a very visceral, tangible way. So let's take a look. The Academic Engagement Network is an organization primarily for faculty, and they do a lot of work with supporting faculty, whether it's you need support because you're being targeted because you're a Jew, or you need support because you're being targeted because you're an ally of Jews, or you need education and information. They equip faculty, much like ISGAP does. ISGAP does it on a wide-ranging scale. AEN does it on a smaller scale with very specific. I think they have 1,300 members, including Christian faculty. They have a Christian cohort. I could be wrong, but I believe they're the only Jewish organization that has a Christian cohort. And so Christian professors who want to be allies to Israel and to Jews are finding support and resources in AEN. That's who flew me out to DC for the ICC conference, the summit this week. AEN took 50 faculty members. They took 50, all expenses paid, to learn about how better to love and support Israel for 3 days. It was incredible. And they're not like, you're not going to go because you're Christian. They're like, no, we really want you to go because you've got a wider platform, right? So in terms of the Christian community, we can reach the Christian community better than they can reach the Christian community. So there are faculty members who are official proponents of an organization that exists to serve Jewish faculty well. So you have that. Here's a picture of the 50 of us at the ICC summit on, I think we took that picture on Tuesday. See people you recognize? Then you have a group I didn't know about until about 3 months ago, maybe 4 months ago, called Christians United for Israel. Some people take issue with the founder but like, you shouldn't, because he doesn't care that you take issue with him. He wants you to love Israel, right? So I'll tell you the work they're doing, and then you'll understand why I say that. I'd never heard of them. And it's Amy Ellman introduced me, and Ellen Cannon introduced me. Said, hey, have you ever heard of CUFI? And I was like, no, Ellen, I've never heard of CUFI. I looked them up. I was like, oh, wow, there's a whole organization for Christians who love Israel? Who knew? And I got connected to them, and they took 28 faculty members, all expenses paid, to Israel in June. And my husband, who is also a professor, and I went on that trip. It was incredible. It was life-changing. Being boots on the ground in Israel, being able to come back and tell students, I saw first person with my eyes that there is no apartheid. You know, it gives you a credibility that you lack otherwise, to be able to say I was there. CUFI is so well funded by Christian donors and Jewish donors that they take 3 student trips to Israel every year. They do 2 in the summer and 1 in December. Do y'all understand how expensive it is to take all those people to Israel? The plane flights, the food, the hotel rooms, and then there are like gifts everywhere you go. It's a lot of money, and they ask nothing in return. They don't want you to do anything in return other than bring the knowledge home. And when you talk about Israel, speak from an informed place. They're not asking you to believe any kind of theology. There's no like Bible study on the trip. They're not trying to force you to believe something you don't believe. But they want Christians, pastors, students, and faculty. This year was the very first faculty trip. They inaugurated it. I'm so blessed and grateful to have been a part of it. It was, again, life-changing. I'll show you some pictures in a minute. They are not just taking people to Israel and helping them see the truth and the beauty of the people in Israel and of the land and why it should be Israel's and why Israel has a right to exist and to defend itself. They also help bring about legislation that offsets anti-Semitism and helps Jews, supports Jews. So they're very active in getting Congress people to listen. As a matter of fact, after the Israel trip, there was a summit, a CUFI summit in DC. It's been a busy summer. But it was amazing. And after all of this incredible information and speakers and hostages were there, former hostages were there, Hirsch's parents were there, John and Rachel Poland were there talking about what it meant to lose their son Hirsch to the terrorists. You know, all kinds of speakers. Israeli security people, Israeli moms and dads, Christian people, people from all over, Muslim, everybody who wants to support Israel, they were there. So they're not just doing that. They send you out on the last day. They bus you with police escorts up to Capitol Hill to go and talk to your Congress people, whoever's in your state and your district. Whatever your district is, you get assigned to that person. I spoke to 3 Congress people that day. One of them was a raging anti-Semite. She was not interested. But the other 2 were so receptive to the 3 bills that we're trying to get passed that will help Israel continue to defend itself. So they break the huddle and they go out onto the field and get things done. So, you know, regardless of how you might feel about the theology of the pastor, some people think he's controversial. I really haven't seen anything. I so admire, and I saw him in person talk at the summit, I so admire his passion for Israel and his heart for helping people understand who Israelis are and why we should love Jews. It has nothing to do with end-time prophecy. They're the apple of God's eye, and we should love what God loves. So that's amazing. Hey, y'all, CUFI is almost 11 million strong. There are almost 11 million Christians who are members of that organization. Do you understand that that's more than there are people in Israel? You have allies. You are not alone. They are silent, and you may not know they exist, but you have allies, and they're out marching the streets at least once every year onto Capitol Hill to advocate on your behalf for legislation. So here is these are just a few pictures from the trip. They, again, took us everywhere, all over Israel. And I'm going to roll call this trip because I want you to understand the investment that CUFI is making in its members to help people get the word out about Israel. So here's one of the places. This was the Sea of, obviously up above on Mount Scopus. Here's the Sea of Galilee, which was just, I mean, I could just live in that spot forever. Here was Tel Aviv. And we had some, bombs flying over, and we had to go into shelters a few times. And I thought, good, this is exactly what Jews have to live with on a daily basis. It's good for me to understand what they have to experience on a daily basis. But they didn't only take us to the beautiful places and the historic places and the places that were relevant to Judaism and Christianity. We didn't only go there. We also went to the Nova Music Festival site, and you can see the metal sculptures, the anemone flower that looks like a poppy that represents, the loss of life, the tragic loss of life at the Nova Music Festival. We went to several kibbutzim where the people were raped, murdered, and taken hostage. I didn't put the most graphic pictures up because it's already depressing enough. We're talking about anti-Semitism. But I thought this was especially poignant, this picture of the child's toy in front of this demolished house. And when you walk inside, it's gutted, it's grenaded, there are bullet holes in the wall, there are blood stains, the kitchen is destroyed. I mean, to see that innocent child's toy outside just really spoke to me. Winnie the Pooh, and what happened to that child that day. So I want to give you a quick roll call of all the places they took 28 faculty members. We began with a tour of Reichman University. We did the history of Caesarea. We did drive down the Mediterranean coast. We went to the boating on the Sea of Galilee. We went to the Golan Heights. We did a security crisis simulation at the Alma Center. We met displaced Israelis in the north. We were all the way at the northern border where Syria and Lebanon are. You could throw a rock right across the border. They took us into dangerous places and kept us really safe because they wanted us to see what Israelis have to live with on a daily basis. We spoke to a guy, he's got 15 seconds when the bomb alert goes off to get to his shelter. 15 seconds. If you're at the northern border, you don't have a lot of time. If you're in Jerusalem, you might have 1 minute and 15 seconds to get to a bomb shelter. we went there, we went to the Mount of Beatitudes, Capernaum or Capernaum or Capernaum, however you want to say it. Magdala, the Jordan River, Mount Scopus. We had a Shabbat dinner hosted by a local family. It was amazing. They fed 28 of us in Shabbat dinner. We went to the Mount of Olives. We did the Garden of Gethsemane. We did the Pool of Bethsaida. We went to the Israel security fence with Colonel Danny Terza. He was incredible. He planned it and implemented it. He was an amazing speaker, and we learned so much. You could throw a rock and hit Gaza. We were in the Gaza envelope. It was incredible. Went to the Pool of Siloam, Pilgrim's Road, did the City of David. We went to archaeological discoveries that are not yet open to the public. That's the kind of pull that Kufi has. We did the Jewish Quarter in the Old City. We went to an amazing art gallery where the generous man who owned it gave us all prints for free. And that's just the heart of the Jewish people. They're generous and loving and kind and courteous. It was incredible. And everywhere we went, they said, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being in Israel. We went to the Western Wall tunnels, underground. It was amazing. We did Yad Vashem. We did the Qumran Caves. We went to the Dead Sea. We spoke with Jonathan Conricus. He gave an amazing talk. Retired lieutenant colonel. We went to the Hostage Forum headquarters and heard from a former hostage. We did the Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. We went to Save a Child's Heart, where we learned about the humanitarian work that Israel does, including saving the lives of Muslim children. They're brought to Israel for life-changing surgeries, life-saving surgeries, and we ended with Ol Jaffa. Guys, 10 days. That's how many things Kufi did in 10 days with its faculty members. So I say that to tell you, any organization that cares enough to invest that kind of money, we're talking big dollars, those are not little dollars, big money just to make people understand what Israel really is, you have allies, almost 11 million strong. Here is the end of the summit. 2,000 people attended. 2,000 Christians attended the summit. Everybody, I should have put the video in, everybody was waving the Israeli flag alongside the American flag and singing on behalf of Israel. It was a beautiful, powerful, emotional thing to see, especially if you feel like you're always alone. Whether you're a Christian or a Jew, you feel like in your allyship, you're always alone. To see that many people so enthused about their love for Jews and Israel, it was just really heartening and encouraging. Then you have a brand new group. My colleague and good friend Aaron Free, he does a lot of work on behalf of advocacy for Israel. He has a nonprofit called Israel Team. And he, again, wants to break the huddle and go out onto the field and execute the plays. Let's not just sit around in the huddle talking about the plays. Let's go execute some things. He wants to intervene in the Christian world. There's a lot of intervention in the academic world. There's a lot of intervention in the Jewish world. There's not a lot of intervention against anti-Semitism, formal intervention in the Christian world. So he put together this coalition of people. didn't put my picture up there because I'm standing here in front of you, so you don't need to see my picture up there. And there are more of us. There are more of us. There are people who just, while we have meetings, they just pray silently. Their job is to pray while we meet and organize. His vision is to bring to Christian college campuses and churches the truth about Israel. And so we're doing a campus tour of major Christian colleges. We're inaugurating it this year. The very first speaking event, symposium, will be at Regent College. It's a Christian college in Virginia Beach. And then they're looking at Biola and Baylor, and then coming to Wheaton College in the spring. I'll be gone in the fall, so we can't do it until the spring. And each college, we are choosing speakers that are related to the need for that particular campus. Every campus has a different need and has a different ideological climate. For example, Regent is fully on board. Regent loves Israel. There are, many Zionists at Regent. They don't need to be convinced. They need to be informed and equipped to better make an argument on behalf of their beliefs. But there are other colleges where it's very different. It's hostile. It's a hostile environment. And, people are walking around wearing the keffiyeh. And so they need a different set of speakers. So Aaron gave this analogy at our very first meeting about redwoods, and it was a cool analogy about how their roots grow. And I said, hey, you should name it the Redwood Coalition, and he did. And so you have a people group. This is Aaron to the left. This is Gerald McDermott has done he's a wonderful scholar. He's even based in Jerusalem. He is a Christian scholar. He's done incredible work on behalf of Jews. He's got a book called Why Israel Matters. Highly recommend that you read it. So you want to know how Christians think or should think, read Why Israel Matters. And it's not like end-time prophecy. It's got nothing to do with that. Dexter Van Zyl is an incredible voice for Middle Eastern affairs and conflicts, and he is, again, he's a Catholic Zionist. Down here you have two filmmakers, Todd Moorhead and Justin Krohn. They did the film October 7th, which is coming out, I think, in October. It is incredible. It is gut-wrenching. I saw it. I was very blessed to have a preview of it, and I can't wait for it to come out. It's another tool I'll use in my classroom along with October 8th. I took students to see October 8th in the theater. Do that if you can. And then this is A.J. Nolte, who has just founded an Institute of Israeli Studies at Regent University. Full support, and he's well-funded. He's taking students on trips to Israel and Poland. He's doing a lot of amazing work to offset anti-Semitism in the culture and to equip his students to go out into the culture and do that work. So just that small group of people is already effecting great change in the Christian community. They are allies. They don't care about end-time prophecy. God loves Jews, they love Jews, right? We want to emulate the values that God says, be loving, be truthful, be good, be kind, be faithful, be self-controlled, be compassionate, be charitable, love Jews. And so authentic Christians want to do all of those things. They want to please their God. They want to be loving, kind, gentle, self-controlled. And they want to love Jews, and not because they have anything to gain from it. It's because you don't have Christianity without Judaism. And if there were no other reason to love and appreciate the Jewish people, it is because they brought us the moral code. Like, the laws of Western society are based on the moral code that the Jews brought. If you don't believe me, read Dr. Patterson's book. It's incredible on morality and anti-Semitism. I make students read his book. So like half of my syllabus is all ISGAP scholars because there's such brilliant people who write such amazing things that make a difference in students' minds. So you have allies. You just don't see them all the time. Or you might see them and think, you might object to them, and here's why you might object to them. You might say, well, you've heard me say this multiple times, you just are supporting Jews because you think we're going to bring in your end-time prophecy. There are those people, sure, of course there are those people. They're not the majority. I've been a Christian for 30 years. 32, wow, 32, getting old. And I never experienced that until 4 years ago. Never even knew it existed until 4 years ago. And then the other objection, we cannot get on board with you so-called Christians who claim to be allies because you have way too much evil in your history, we cannot trust you. That's not false. There's a lot of, you saw the evil in the history, right? However, we don't judge Mother Teresa by Torquemada. right? You don't look at the Corrie ten Boom and judge her by Hitler. So you look at, I'm sorry, my brain is so tired. The righteous, the tree-lined avenue in Israel, the Avenue of the Righteous, thank you. For all of the non-believers, the Gentiles who sacrificed themselves or their lives in order to help Jews. And so there are those people, and we can't look only at the bad and make the same synecdoche error that people make with Jews. People make the synecdoche error all the time with Jews, right? That's where these tropes and libels come in. It's the example I gave you earlier. One guy cheated, so all men cheat. No, they don't. I have an amazing husband. No, they don't. So we don't want to make that same error in reverse with Christians. Well, many Christians did X, so all Christians must want to do X. Or Christians in the past did Y, so Christians today must want to do Y. No, there are people who have sense. In my country, we call it having, it's like the highest compliment you can give a Jamaican is to say, you have sense. And the worst insult you can give a Jamaican is to say, you don't have any sense. So you are sensical. You are sensical when you understand that you cannot tar everybody with the same brush. So how do you move the needle? Here's how I do it. I said earlier in the pedagogy workshop, you have to tend your garden to the best of your ability. You might have a garden of roses. You might have a garden of weeds. You might have a garden of lilies. You might have a garden of, I don't know what, tulips. But you have to understand the garden and tend it well. You don't treat a rose the way you treat a tulip. It needs different, water and sunlight and fertilizer and all the rest of it. So know your garden and tend your garden well. My garden is the English classroom. I am a professor of literature. That's my garden. And so how do I get students to understand the history of anti-Semitism, the dangers of anti-Semitism, and the truth about Israel and Jews when I'm not a politician, I don't teach poli-sci, but I am an English teacher, and there's nothing more powerful than story. Narrative is story. When you get to know each other, you don't exchange CVs. You didn't walk up to each other and say, hi, this is my CV. You shared stories. You exchanged why you're here or where you came from or what brought you to this institute. We build relationship through story. And if you build relationships with students through story, you can show them the power of truth. So I use memoir in my classroom to help show the historical past of anti-Semitism and how it parallels contemporary anti-Semitism, and then move that out into 10/7 and what it looks like when Israel is fighting for its existence and terrorists are being lauded and applauded in the streets and Jews are being maligned and derided in the streets. What does that look like? So I use literature, I use film and story. I don't use fiction. I don't personally, and this is just an opinion, it's not like law. For me, I don't want fiction in my Holocaust classroom. I have a class called The Holocaust and the Holy Land, a literary exploration. So we're not just talking about the Holocaust, we're talking about the nation of Israel. For me, I want them to be grounded in the reality of what was done to Jews. I don't want them to say, oh, well, it wasn't that bad, this was fiction. I don't ever want anybody to have that excuse, oh, it couldn't have been that bad, this was fiction. No, it was that bad, it was worse. It was worse than that bad. So let's read the true stories. So this is the result. After my students go through 16 weeks of 5,000 readings, I warn them on the first day, it's a lot of reading, and many films and lots of seminars and all kinds of assignments, here's what the result is. I will not read them all to you or even a whole of one. I'll just read you snippets and excerpts so you can kind of see. I asked them at the end, what did you learn culturally and what did you learn spiritually? What would you learn personally? So I asked them for 3 lessons. What is your spiritual takeaway? What is your cultural takeaway? And what is your personal takeaway? And my students know they never have to agree with me, and some don't. I had 25 students. The class had a wait list, so there are students interested in the topic. And I thought for sure somebody would drop, and no one did, and I kind of wish one had, but he didn't. And he didn't change his mind by the end of the semester, but 24 out of 25 did. So, hey, if I can move one, if I can get one to see the truth, I'm happy. So she says, Jews have a rich history and culture, and they go beyond the events of the Holocaust. We don't teach enough about the successes of Jews and the contribution of Jews. We focus on Jew as victim, and Jew is victim. Like, if you want to have a victim war, you're not going to out-victim a Jew. Sorry, you're just not. There's no people group on the face of the planet that has experienced more persecution than Jews. for millennia, go all the way back to Egypt. There's objectively no people group who's experienced more. That doesn't mean other people's traumas aren't real or important, but if you're going to play the victim game, you're not going to out-victim a Jew. So she says, I don't want them to get stuck in Jew as victim. I want them to see the wonderful contributions Jews have made to the world. So she recognizes that. It goes beyond the events of the Holocaust, why Jewish history matters, the importance of being a witness to the stories of others. We can't let these stories die. And then what she learned about God, trusting him more than trusting the things of the world and remaining prayerful. That was her takeaway. This student learned, she said, the one cultural lesson she learned is about the anti-Semitic tropes. So, you know, the blood libel and all the rest of it. There are 5 primary tropes. I'm sure if you haven't already learned them, here you will. And if not, come see me, I'll give them to you. I knew Jewish people experienced prejudice and discrimination, but it was important for me to see how it was rooted in tropes that demean and dehumanize them. She was encouraged to become familiar with issues she didn't know about. She's a sociology major, so now she has a deeper understanding of the challenges Jews face. And then this student said, this student is an amazing human being. This young man is graduating, I think, in December of this year. And he is already interning in the Senate in Washington. He's going to law school. He wants to be in politics. He's an amazing kid. And he said, this is December of last year, 2024. He said, I had never heard of 10-7 until I took this class. That kid sat in classrooms for a year and nobody mentioned 10-7. It was not commemorated. It was not discussed. It was not analyzed. Nobody mentioned it till he took the Holocaust-like class. But now he is on fire to be an advocate for Israel and for Jews. And this student says, let me pull out an excerpt, this conflation of white privilege with Jews, this oppressor, colonialist narrative. And then she says, Wiesel reminds us, we have to speak up against these false sentiments. She recognizes that they are false. So that is what you can accomplish if you teach it the right way and you choose the right resources and give them, and you have the courage to stand up and speak out and to teach, even though you might face pushback from it, from your colleagues or from your administration. I have a supportive administration. I'm very blessed to have that. I want to leave you with this slide. My colleague Aaron Free, I bring him every year to my Holocaust class as a guest speaker. I bring several people. He's one of them. He does a fantastic job with Christian anti-Semitism. And he always leaves students with this scripture, so I want to share it with you. I want it to remind you of why, as I always say, we know how this ends. Jews win. We know how it ends. Jews win. Just wait, right? The waiting is hard, and there's a lot of trauma in the waiting, but Jews win. So Jeremiah 31:35 through 37, I wish my theologian had the mic. I'd make him read it. Thus says the Lord, who gives the sun. Remember, you're talking to a Christian audience. He's dealing with Christian students. Who gives the sun for light by day and the fixed order of the moon and the stars for light by night, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. Quoting God, thus says the Lord, if this fixed order of the sun, the stars, and the ocean this fixed order departs from before me, declares the Lord, then shall the offspring of Israel cease from being a nation before me forever. God says here in Jeremiah, the sun would have to no longer exist, the stars would have to no longer exist, and the ocean would have to no longer exist before Israel ceases to exist. That should give you hope, even if you're not religious, right? You should understand, okay, if Christians believe that, because authentic Christians recognize the relationship between the Torah and the New Testament, if Christians believe that, then maybe there's hope, and you don't have to feel so alone, because there are so many of us who love you and who support you and who want to see Israel have the right to its state without having to have an iron dome over its head. And so I leave you, my friends, with Am Yisrael Chai. That's what you need to remember.
You talk loud because the microphones are over here, or maybe I'll start and then you said. go after you.
Thank you so much for such an informative presentation, especially with the history of Christian anti-Semitism. I found that really helpful in contextualizing some of the tropes that we see today. So in recent years, we have heard the term Palestinian Jesus, which is a form of deicide and also makes Palestinians out to be the new Jews and thus experiencing a Holocaust, which the word itself is derived from the Greek word meaning the burnt offering or sacrifice. So additionally, the coupling of Palestinian and Jesus, both of whom are seen as victims of the Jews, results in and reinforces the notion of purity and martyrdom for the secular far left, Islamists, and white supremacists. So is this conceptualization of Jesus as Palestinian an example of a Rorschach test that Islamists, the secular left, and white supremacists, where they can unite under the banner of self-righteousness and their perpetuation of anti-Semitism? Thank you.
Thank you for your.
Can I add to her question?
Oh yeah, sure.
So I'm going to
wait, I have to
take the
write
liberty of sort of adding to your question because I had a similar question. So to sort of piggyback on what you're saying, I think, the work of Said in a way is replacement theology. I think this is what is kind of implied in your question, that he's the last remaining Jewish intellectual, the Palestinians are the Jews, the Israelis are the Nazis, the Israelis are foreign, the occupation has to end. It's really, we've seen this film before. I think it's deeply rooted in Christian replacement theology.
Deeply. So
I want to kind of reinforce your question, and then being the nudnik that I am, how please start with this question, and then the second question would be, how do you reconcile the responsibility that you have, that Christians have, to spread the word, which is an obligation, responsibility, to Jewish people, to non-Christians, but to Jews in particular? Are we still blind? And what are the implications of that?
Okay. So let's start with the first one. Thank you for that excellent question, and thank you for adding to the excellent question with excellent commenting. But you're Charles, I expect nothing less. It's going to be brilliant. So I think that there is a conflation in that community that is deeply hypocritical, that they don't even see for themselves, because there's a statement, there's a saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so you have these misalliances of like the nationalists, Christian nationalists, anti-Semitic Christian nationalists with anti-Semitic terrorist supporters or Palestinians. And I'm not lumping all Palestinians into one basket, but like 82% of people polled, agreed that Hamas was doing a great job. How much of that is because they feel they have to or they'll be killed? I don't know. I'm not there. But the data shows a large percentage of Palestinians support Hamas and think that what they're doing is okay. So they're brown people. The white Christian supremacists don't like brown people, but they're in agreement with the brown people because it means that we can both hate Jews. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So they're between a rock and a hard place. It's like, oh, I hate them, but I hate them worse. So let me work with these people so that I can better direct my hate at these other people over here. So it's a misalliance, and it will eventually result in my opinion, I mean, look at the way things are, look at Iran, right, what just happened in Iran. I think they are cutting off their noses to spite their faces. I think the movement here, that movement here, and you have people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and whatnot, and far more than that, other people, big name pastors, not that big name, I never heard of them, but now I know who they are from 2 years ago. I think that those people are eclipsed by the other voices who say, no, you're wrong. And I think that people who are good old Jamaican have sense, understand that that's not truth, and they're working in whatever ways they can to offset it, even if it's simply by not participating in those lies. So is it toxic and unhealthy? Yes. Do I think they'll succeed? No. I think they will burn themselves out. And I see in the young people today, people waking up. I see people moving away from that mentality and from those ideologies. So to me, that's good news. And Charles asks a really important question. This question has come up in so many different places and venues and realms, and I thank you for asking it because everybody needs to hear the answer. There, I think, is a misunderstanding, move this thing. There's a misunderstanding of what Christians are supposedly called to do and what Christians are supposed to do with Jews. So the Bible never, the New Testament never says to anybody, go and convert a Jew. It doesn't say that. Go and make disciples, teach people about the love and the goodness and the whatever, everything that comprises the religion. But it doesn't say go out and convert a Jew. As a matter of fact, it says the opposite. And this is why reading Paul is so important. If you read Romans 9 through 11, for one, that's like one big place where you'll find these things. Paul says, and also in the Gospels, Jesus says, so you take Jesus and Paul, the two most authoritative people, right? They say that the Apostle Paul had the most influence on Christianity besides Augustine. So you take Jesus, the architect of the faith, and the Apostle Paul, his right-hand man. Both of them talk about Israel. And Jesus says, listen, they are the natural branches. They were here first. You were grafted in, you Gentiles. You were grafted in. And be careful lest you get thrown into the fire. Because the natural branch has more of a right to be here than you people who are grafted in. And then, I'm paraphrasing. And Paul says, throughout those sections, we are told all Israel, God has not forgotten his people. Paul says, I am first and foremost a Jew. First and foremost, I'm a Jew. And then he goes through like how Jewish he is, right? And then he says, listen, all Israel will be saved. Interpret that how you want it. But he's saying is to keep going, like the word saved is, I know that is a problematic term for people because it gets very attached to like the Christian idea of salvation through Jesus. That's not, Paul is not using it in that sense. He's using it in the general sense of like you're drowning, you got saved, right? He says there's nothing that can make God break his covenant with the Jewish people. That's a Christian apostle teaching there's nothing that can make God break his covenant with the Jewish people. So if you're calling yourself a Christian and you're reading Go and Make Disciples, and some people do, and I'm not criticizing anybody, like everybody has his or her own way of applying faith. Like, who am I to say, you shouldn't do it that way? What I can do is control myself. I can't control other people. I've never tried to convert a Jew. I don't think that's my responsibility. My responsibility is to love Jews, and there are many, many, many Christians who don't feel a responsibility to convert any Jew to anything. To the contrary, they feel a responsibility to show Jews that they are loved and that they are welcome. They don't need to change who they are to be accepted by Christians. But what Charles asked about, that exists, does exist. As a matter of fact, I have a friend who almost didn't go on the trip to Israel because he said, well, that organization doesn't want to convert Jews. And I was like, you stay home. I'm going to Israel. I said, that's not their focus. That might be your thing that you believe and your passion. That's not their focus. Their focus is to show Jews they have allies. So what is it with this particular, I said, I think you're missing an incredible opportunity. Why don't you call the people up and talk to them about their stance? And he did, and he ended up going on the trip, and he was glad he went on the trip. He loved it. And he's actually Jewish. I know this is a problematic term. This is how he identifies. I'm not saying anything other than this is how he identifies as a Messianic Jew. That's how he identifies, right? So for him, that might be that impetus to do this might be tied up with where he came from and where he is now. Maybe I'm not a psychologist, Larry is. He may be able to speak to that. So yes, there are people who believe that, but there are also people who don't think it's a Christian's job to convert a Jew. If you want to ask me about my faith, I'm happy to share with you why I believe what I believe, but what you believe is up to you. I am not God. I can't change minds or hearts. I am called to just share what I believe and why I believe it, and what you do with that is completely up to you. And I don't condemn you because you don't believe what I believe. And I hope I'm not condemned for not believing what other people believe. I have an amazing friend. He's a wonderful man. He's a Muslim. He's pro-Israel. He's a total Zionist. And we don't believe the same things about God, but we love each other. we get along. We don't argue, right? We're not, because you believe what you believe and I believe what I believe, and we all have that right. So I hope that you will be encouraged by that. Again, there's so many different sects of Christianity, and we don't all believe the same thing.
Thank you for your talk, and thank you for your allyship. From a rhetorical analysis, seeing what your students are writing, seems to me that there's an objectification of Jews as a block, as an object, as something about which they are learning, and not really a lot of engagement with Jews or Jewish voices necessarily. And there might be, and you didn't have time to present everything, but it just felt very objectifying to me in some ways.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really important feedback. I think it feels that way because they were given a very specific prompt about Jews, right? And so they're responding to a very specific prompt. And the prompt is, what are your takeaways about anti-Semitism and the Jewish people after taking this class? So it may seem objectified, but I promise you they're not. They not only hear from Jewish speakers. I bring in David Bernstein, I bring in Amy Elliman. Every single author they read is Jewish. All of the authors, for the primary sources and the secondary sources. They read Charles, they start with Charles's global anti-Semitism piece. I said earlier, like, most of the people on my syllabus are ISGAP people because ISGAP people do incredible, amazing work, and why would I not expose my students to that level of thinking? So they hear from Jewish voices in film, they read Jewish voices in the literature, they read Jewish voices in the research, and I bring Jewish voices in through guest speakers. But the question that they're responding to is a very direct, specific question, and I think that's why it might be coming across that way. So I will really look to see how I can change the question to offset that problem. So thank you. Yes.
Thank you for this incredible talk. I also just want to say CUFI is an incredible organization. One of the things that really stood out to me, my family flew up there for the DC Summit. My 15-year-old was able to speak to 200 high school students, Christian high school students, 300 college students, and to your point, like, the organization is really intentional about making it relational instead of, like you just mentioned. I also want to say that there's to your point, CUFI is very much within the advocacy and educational space. One of the things that they've been very successful in, as we go state by state with critiques on Holocaust education, they have their own Holocaust instructional materials that are being sometimes mandated or being accredited to go within the school district. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, not only in the materials being pedagogical in a way, but also how we can frame them as allies, and as they're working to get Holocaust materials into schools, how Jews can really be part of that work with them. Thank you.
Thank you. I just picked up a book at their summit. They have a great initiative in trying to get this curriculum into K through 12. My friend Aaron is doing the same thing. He's already speaking, and he was at a 5th grade classroom the other day speaking about this issue. He was very well received. So there's work being done in that area. I think it is critical to bring Jewish voices alongside to help form that curriculum, or in some cases, as you're reaching different levels, curricula. And I think that the most important thing, there's a fantastic article by Dara Horn about the failure of Holocaust education and how it's actually making things worse. And when you divorce Holocaust education from the particularity of Jews, you are making it just one other ism, just one other prejudice, and you're not showing the entire existential millennial history of persecution of the Jewish people. Why? Why always the Jews in every epoch, in every era? Why? In every country? Why? And so it just becomes one more thing in a series of things to students, is her argument. And so I agree with her that Holocaust education done wrong is detrimental. Larry said something earlier that was fantastic. He made a great point about a certain issue, and he's like, if this ideology were working, things would be better, not worse. Things have gotten worse. And I said, you're absolutely right. It would get better, not worse. And so Holocaust education, if anti-Semitism is getting worse, then we have failed, right? So what is it that we need to do in Holocaust education to make a change, to reevaluate the ways in which we teach those materials so that we can have students really begin to understand the history and the danger of, listen, you've heard this 1,000 times. I'm sure I'm not the first person to say it. I'm sure Charles had to have said it on the first day. It starts with the Jews, it never ends with the Jews. First they come for the Saturday people, and then they come for the Sunday people. Like, if you think you're safe because you're not Jewish, keep dreaming. Like, they're coming for the West. They're not just coming for the Jews. Jews are just in the way of the West, right? And they have a particular hatred of Jews, and that goes all the way back, way back. So what I do is I disrupt that paradigm of Holocaust education, and I teach it in a very different way. I think the last time I was at ISGAP, my whole presentation was on how to teach Holocaust well, how to bring contemporary anti-Semitism into it, to show them what's happening today and how it's mirroring what was happening then. If you were in the pedagogy workshop, you saw the statements that Jewish students, were told, I can't even remember right now, you should be in an oven or whatever it was. Why don't you go to Auschwitz, the restaurant called Auschwitz? They serve roasted Jew there. That, as I said, this is 2025. This is not 1938 Hitler's Germany. So they can see, when I can bring those instances to them, like, this is what's happening today with people your age. This is not some removed thing 80 years ago that you're seeing in black and white photos, right? So there's a way in which to teach it that I've seen clearly makes a difference. I had a student tell me, she just graduated, she's an incredible young woman, she was a psychology major, she changed her major to English because of my Holocaust Lit class. They made her change her major. So that's the power of teaching literature well.
So before Dr. Chavez, also just a quick point. Professor Ruth Weiss said that our community, the Jewish community, made a terrible mistake by putting the Holocaust out in front. And in Washington, there's the Holocaust Museum. Now finally there's an African American museum that celebrates African American culture. What we've done, with the help of the State Department, is put the Holocaust as representative of the Jewish people. And she thinks actually people learn, in a sense that it's been done, they can learn to hate Jews. Right. And we don't present our culture, we don't present our wisdom. So she makes a very strong argument. Dr. Chavez. We have to finish in a couple of minutes, really.
I'll be very, very quick. Thank you so much for very informative. I learned a lot. My background before going into theology and religion, divinity, organic chemist. So I'm always concerned balancing the qualitative with the quantitative. It seems to me the opponents of anti-Semitism have all of the qualitative arguments, but we lose on the quantitative distribution of the argument. The pro-Hamas people have very weak qualitative analysis, but they're winning the quantitative distribution of their weakness. And so what happens is, on behalf of the African American community, there are 50 million African Americans in the United States. Most of them are Christian. Not all, but most. In the black churches, they get very little education about the Holocaust. Very little about the historic relationship between blacks and Jews in America. Although we say the Judeo-Christian tradition, it's just become a phrase, people don't unpack it. So my question to you is, at the Christian colleges that you work with, or do you work with any of the African American Christian colleges?
We're starting with the biggest ones that have the most hostile climates on campus. And then we're trying to move to all of them. Like, we want to hit all of them eventually. And what I'd like to see, and I met a couple of people at the ICC summit, I met a couple of African Americans who were there to support Israel. And what I'd like to see is a contingent of African American / Black faculty, maybe they're not African American, they're from someplace else, but they're Black, intervene in the K through 12 space. I'd love to see short, quick symposia, guest lectures, guest talks, guest teachings in those classrooms, because CUFI even has like kindergarten level instruction, you know, for like teaching students about Israel. So that might be a project you could spearhead, I don't know, but it would, I think, make a big difference if we could have Black voices in those spaces to help reach those students and those children before their brains are co-opted by, you know, false narratives.
Right, it seems, as Charles said, it seems to me that not much of a losing, but the rise of anti-Semitism continues to grow. So I don't blame the Jewish community for that. But I do think that if we want to challenge and reduce anti-Semitism, even end it, that all of the things that we've been doing thus far, we need to assess and to try to do something in addition, not to stop doing what's doing, but what do we build upon the foundation that's already built out there? And I suggest, as I've been saying in other forums, that I think a closer working relationship between Blacks and Jews. Blacks and Jews who are Jewish, Blacks and Jews who are Christian, but overall the overarching unity, the overarching solidarity, I think would help stem some of the tide of the ignorance that's out there now about Israel, about Jews, and also about African Americans and relationship. And there's a lot of work that we have to do to remind people in the Black community about that historic relationship also. Because I'll just say on the record, I think Black church leaders have been utterly silent on the question of anti-Semitism. Utterly silent. And I think that, but there is a way to, I think, get those voices to be raised and get those voices to help us on the quantitative distribution of what we know to be true.
I'm putting you in charge of that. I think that's an amazing project and goal, and I think you should pursue it. Somebody asked me a question this morning about the Black church, and I'm not familiar with all of the tenets of the Black church, and I wish you had been in that session so you could have answered it. I'll try to remember who asked me that question and send that person to you. That would be amazing.
All right, so I have one more question. You flew in this morning, late last night?
Yesterday, yeah.
Where do you get your energy from? You have four lectures. Anyways, on behalf of everybody here, thank you for being here and for your amazing work.
Thank you, Charles. Thanks for having me.
All right, so there's tea time, and we're coming back for the plenary session in like 20 minutes. I think a very important plenary session.